The atmosphere aboard Eclipse Vanguard was electric with tension as the crew worked tirelessly to prepare for the battle ahead. The Kryn's Singularity Core, now safely secured in the ship's engineering bay, became the focal point of their efforts. Dr. Elena Voss and her team of technicians pored over its intricate design, trying to understand how it functioned and whether it could truly deliver on its promise to destroy the swarm's hive mind. "It's incredible," Voss muttered, running her fingers along the glowing runes etched into the sphere's surface. "This technology is centuries ahead of anything we've developed. If we can harness even a fraction of its potential." Her voice trailed off as she glanced at Commander Eric Kane, who stood nearby observing the process. His expression was unreadable, but his clenched fists betrayed the weight of the decision he'd have to make soon. Someone would need to stay behind to activate the core, a suicide mission that no one wanted to volunteer for. Meanwhile, Eclipse Division trained relentlessly, adapting their tactics to combat the biomechanical horrors they'd encountered earlier. Lieutenant Marisolis pushed her team harder than ever, drilling them on close-quarters combat and synchronized attacks. Every soldier knew this wouldn't be like previous missions. The swarm wasn't just an enemy. It was relentless, adaptive, and seemingly endless. "We're not fighting machines or aliens here," Mara told her squad during one particularly grueling session. "We're up against something that doesn't feel pain, doesn't hesitate, and doesn't stop until everything around it is gone. You slip up once, and you're dead." Despite her harsh words, there was an unspoken understanding among the team. Fear was natural, but so was determination. They were Earth's ultimate force of destruction, engineered to face impossible odds. And if anyone could pull off a miracle, it was them. As preparations continued, strange occurrences plagued the fleet once again. Equipment malfunctions grew more frequent, and several crew members reported vivid nightmares, filled with screeching metal and glowing red eyes. Even Dr. Voss wasn't immune. She woke one night drenched in sweat after dreaming of the swarm consuming her hometown back on Earth. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was stress. But deep down, she wondered if the swarm's influence was already seeping into their minds. Commander Kane called a meeting with his senior officers to discuss strategy. Around the table sat Mara, Dr. Voss, and Captain Rylan Hayes, the fleet's tactical expert. Holographic projections displayed maps of the planet's surface, highlighting the location of the swarm's hive. "We'll deploy in waves," Kane began, pointing to the map. "Alpha Team will secure the perimeter while Beta Team escorts Dr. Voss and the core to the hive. Once inside, we activate the device and get out. Simple as that." "Simple?" Mara raised an eyebrow. "Sir, nothing about this mission is simple. We're talking about walking straight into the heart of the swarm. Even if we manage to plant the core, getting out alive is going to be next to impossible." Kane nodded grimly. "I know, which is why I'll be leading Beta Team personally. If anyone has to stay behind to ensure the core works, it'll be me." The room fell silent. No one argued. They all knew Kane was right. As leader, it was his duty to shoulder the greatest risk. But that didn't make it any easier to accept. Dr. Voss spoke up hesitantly. "There might be another way. If we can rig remote detonation systems using the Kryn's tech, we could trigger the core without needing someone to stay behind." "It's worth a shot," Kane said, though his tone suggested he doubted it would work. Still, he gave the order to explore the idea. Hours later, alarms blared throughout the ship. Scanners detected movement above the planet. A massive swarm of biomechanical drones descending toward the fleet. The swarm had found them. "All hands to battle stations," Kane barked over the comms. Within moments, the fleet sprang into action, weapons blazing as they fought off wave after wave of attackers. Eclipse Division deployed groundside to defend the ship's landing zones, engaging the swarm in brutal hand-to-hand combat. For hours, the battle raged on. Dozens of soldiers fell, but humanity's resolve never wavered. When the dust settled, the swarm retreated temporarily, leaving behind a trail of devastation. Though battered and bruised, the humans had held their ground. As the survivors regrouped, Kane looked out at the scared landscape, his resolve hardening. The swarm was stronger than they'd anticipated, but so were they. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And somewhere in the distance, the hive loomed larger, pulsating with malevolent energy. The final showdown was inevitable. In the year 2147, humanity had reached farther into space than ever before. Colonies dotted distant planets, and Earth's unified council ruled over a sprawling interstellar empire. But despite their advancements, humans remained cautious. Space was vast, mysterious, and dangerous, a place where threats could emerge without warning. It was during one of these quiet nights on Mars Station Alpha that Dr. Elena Voss first heard it. She was sitting in her dimly lit lab, surrounded by glowing screens displaying alien languages she'd spent years deciphering. Her fingers moved swiftly across a keyboard when suddenly, an alert flashed red on her monitor. A signal, deep space communication, had been detected. It wasn't just any signal. It was strong, deliberate, and unlike anything they'd encountered before. The transmission crackled with static, but amidst the noise, words began to form. "Help us, before they consume everything." The voice sounded desperate, almost mechanical, as if filtered through layers of distortion. Elena froze, her heart pounding. Who, or what, was sending this message, and who were they? She immediately forwarded the data to Earth's Unified Council, where debates erupted almost instantly. Some council members argued it could be a trap set by hostile aliens, while others insisted ignoring such a plea would go against humanity's moral duty. Meanwhile, Commander Eric Kane received urgent orders at Eclipse Division headquarters. As leader of Earth's most elite military unit, he knew his team might soon face something far beyond their training. Eclipse Division was no ordinary force. Each member had undergone genetic enhancements and rigorous combat simulations. They carried weapons capable of obliterating entire cities if needed. Yet, for all their power, they weren't invincible. This mission felt different, uncertain, even ominous. Commander Kane stood in the briefing room, staring at holographic projections of the signal's origin. It came from the Obsidian Expanse, a region of space shrouded in mystery. Ships that ventured there rarely returned, and those that did brought back tales of eerie silence and abandoned worlds. The Council labeled it a no-fly zone centuries ago, deeming it too risky to explore. Now they wanted Eclipse Division to march straight into its heart. Kane turned to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Marisolis. "What do you think?" he asked, his tone measured but tense. Mara hesitated. Could be legend. Could be bait. Either way, we're walking blind. Back on Mars, Dr. Voss worked tirelessly to decode more of the signal. She noticed patterns embedded within the language, repetitive phrases and symbols that hinted at urgency. Whoever sent this message wasn't merely asking for help. They were begging for salvation. But why now? Why after centuries of silence? As days passed, preparations intensified. Ships were loaded with supplies, weapons calibrated, and strategies reviewed. Yet, unease lingered among the crew. Strange things started happening aboard the fleet. Equipment malfunctioned, shadows flickered in empty hallways, and some soldiers reported hearing faint whispers late at night. Was it stress, or was the signal affecting them somehow? Dr. Voss couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading towards something monumental, something that could change everything, for better or worse. When the fleet finally launched, leaving Mars behind, Commander Kane stood on the bridge, gazing out at the stars. He didn't know what awaited them in the Obsidian Expanse, but one thing was certain. Whatever it was, it wouldn't be easy. Humanity's ultimate force of destruction was about to face its greatest challenge yet. And somewhere in the void, the SOS signal continued to echo, unanswered, for now. The journey back to Earth was long and somber, the weight of their losses hanging over the fleet like a storm cloud. The Eclipse Vanguard led the convoy, its once pristine hull now scared from battle. Inside, the mood was equally grim. Soldiers moved quietly through the corridors, avoiding eye contact as they processed what they'd endured. Commander Eric Kane's absence loomed large. His leadership, charisma, and unwavering resolve were irreplaceable. Dr. Elena Voss spent most of her time in the ship's lab, poring over data collected during the mission. Her mind raced with questions. Had they truly destroyed the swarm? Or had they merely delayed an inevitable return? The faint pulse she detected near the planet's atmosphere haunted her, a constant reminder that their victory might not be as final as it seemed. She replayed Kane's final moments in her head, wondering if there had been another way. Could they have saved him? Should they have stayed longer? Lieutenant Marisolis tried to keep morale high among the surviving members of Eclipse Division, but even she struggled to find words of encouragement. During briefings, she spoke plainly about the sacrifices made and the importance of carrying forward Kane's legacy. He gave everything so we could live, she told them one evening. We owe it to him, and to ourselves, to make sure his death wasn't in vain. As they approached Earth's orbit, the Unified Council convened aboard the flagship for a debriefing session. Dr. Voss presented her findings, explaining the potential risks posed by residual fragments of the swarm. It's possible the core didn't completely eradicate its consciousness, she admitted, projecting holographic images of the faint pulse onto the briefing room wall. If any part of the swarm survived, it could regroup and evolve. We need to prepare for that possibility. Council members exchanged uneasy glances, some visibly shaken by the implications. One counselor leaned forward, his voice sharp. Are you saying this isn't over? That we're still at risk? Voss hesitated before answering. I'm saying we can't afford to let our guard down. If the swarm returns, it will come stronger than before. We must act now to protect Earth. Commander Hayes, who had assumed temporary leadership of Eclipse Division after Kane's death, nodded in agreement. We'll fortify defenses around Earth and begin developing new strategies based on the Kryn's technology. Whatever comes next, we'll be ready. Despite these assurances, unease lingered throughout the fleet. Strange occurrences continued to plague the crew. Equipment malfunctions, unexplained noises, and vivid nightmares plagued many soldiers. Some claimed they saw shadowy figures in empty hallways or heard whispers echoing in their minds. Was it stress? Or was the swarm's influence somehow reaching them across the void? On the final day of their journey, Mara joined Voss in the observation deck, where Earth hung suspended against the blackness of space, a fragile blue gem surrounded by stars. For a moment, neither woman spoke, content to watch the planet grow larger as they descended. You think we did the right thing? Mara asked finally, breaking the silence. Voss sighed, folding her arms tightly across her chest. I don't know. We stopped the immediate threat, but I can't shake the feeling that we've only scratched the surface. The swarm consumed entire civilizations, Mara. What if it consumed more than just energy and life? What if it took pieces of their knowledge, their memories, their souls? Mara frowned, considering this. You mean those echoes you saw in the hive? Voss nodded. If the swarm carries fragments of the beings it devoured, then destroying it meant erasing those trapped voices forever. Did we have the right to do that? To decide their fate? Mara placed a hand on her shoulder. Kane made the call he thought was best for humanity, and you supported him because you believed it too. Don't second-guess yourself now. None of us could have known for sure. But as they gazed out at Earth, both women couldn't ignore the gnawing uncertainty in their hearts. Humanity had faced its greatest challenge and emerged victorious. But at what cost? And how long would their triumph last? When the fleet landed, crowds gathered to welcome the heroes home. Cheers erupted as soldiers disembarked, though their smiles were weary. Among the crowd stood portraits of fallen comrades, including Kane, held aloft by grieving families. It was a bittersweet celebration, one tinged with pride but overshadowed by loss. Yet somewhere beyond the cheers, in the quiet corners of the galaxy, the faint pulse continued to beat, a whisper in the dark, waiting for its chance to rise again. The swarm's resurgence forced humanity to confront its darkest fears. Earth, once a beacon of hope and progress, now stood on the brink of annihilation. The Unified Council declared a global state of emergency, mobilizing every resource to combat the growing threat. Cities were fortified with towering walls and energy shields, while orbital defenses bristled with weapons capable of obliterating entire fleets. Yet, despite these preparations, the sense of impending doom lingered in the hearts of billions. Dr. Elena Voss worked tirelessly alongside Eclipse Division, racing against time to develop new strategies. Her research revealed that the swarm's fragments communicated through subspace frequencies, a network invisible to conventional sensors, but detectable using modified CRIN technology. By reverse engineering the Singularity Core's design, she devised a prototype device capable of disrupting this communication. Dubbed the Resonance Disruptor, it emitted pulses that scrambled the swarm's signals, effectively severing their connection to one another. This could buy us time, Voss explained during a briefing with Lieutenant Marisolis and Captain Rylan Hayes. If we deploy enough disruptors around key locations, we might be able to contain the swarm long enough to find a permanent solution. Hayes nodded grimly. It's risky, but it's our best shot. We'll start deploying them immediately. Eclipse Division led the effort, venturing into infected zones to plant the devices. Each mission was fraught with danger, as clusters of biomechanical drones swarmed their positions, drawn by the disruptor's emissions. Soldiers fought valiantly, holding the line so technicians could complete installations. Many didn't return, their sacrifices etched into the collective memory of humanity. Amidst the chaos, Voss made a startling discovery. Buried within the swarm's fragmented consciousness were traces of intelligence, not just echoes of consumed civilizations, but something more complex. It seemed the swarm had begun evolving beyond its original programming, developing rudimentary self-awareness. This revelation raised troubling questions. Was the swarm truly an enemy, or had it become something else entirely? Could it be reasoned with, or even redeemed? Voss shared her findings with Mara, who listened silently before responding. Even if it's learning, it's still dangerous. Look at what it's done, what it's still doing. We can't take that risk. I know, Voss admitted, but part of me wonders, is destroying it the only answer, or are we making the same mistake the Kryn did? Before they could explore the idea further, reports came in of a massive swarm cluster converging on Earth's moon. If left unchecked, it would launch a full-scale invasion, overwhelming planetary defenses. With no other options, Eclipse Division prepared for one final stand. Under Mura's leadership, the team deployed to the lunar surface, armed with experimental weaponry and dozens of resonance disruptors. The battle was fierce, with waves of drones descending from orbit like a metallic storm. Soldiers fought with everything they had, their resolve unshaken despite overwhelming odds. Slowly but surely, they pushed the swarm back, planting disruptors across strategic points until the network collapsed under its own weight. As the last drone fell, silence descended over the battlefield. Exhausted but victorious, the survivors regrouped beneath the pale glow of Earth hanging in the sky. For the first time in months, there was hope, but also caution. They knew this wasn't the end. The swarm's adaptability meant it would return someday. Back on Earth, humanity began rebuilding, united by the shared struggle. Monuments were erected to honor those who had fallen, including Commander Eric Kane. His sacrifice became a symbol of courage and determination, inspiring future generations to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In her lab, Voss continued studying the swarm's remnants, determined to understand its nature fully. She believed that knowledge held the key to preventing another catastrophe. Beside her desk sat a holographic projection of Kane, smiling faintly, a reminder of why they fought. And somewhere in the void, the faint pulse flickered weakly, waiting for the day when shadows would rise again. Until then, humanity stood ready, its ultimate force of destruction tempered by wisdom and resilience. For now, dawn had broken. but the stars still whispered secrets, and the galaxy remained vast, mysterious, and dangerous. The explosion of the Singularity Core sent shockwaves rippling through the swarm's hive, tearing apart its organic and mechanical structure. The walls convulsed violently, chunks of flesh and metal raining down as the chamber began to collapse. Lieutenant Marisolis and Dr. Elena Voss sprinted through the disintegrating tunnels, their breaths ragged and hearts pounding. Behind them, the roar of destruction grew louder with each passing second. Faster, Mara shouted, grabbing Voss's arm when she stumbled over a piece of debris. We're not out yet. Dr. Voss didn't respond. Her mind was elsewhere, back in that chamber, where Commander Eric Kane had stayed behind to ensure the core's activation. She could still see his face in her mind, calm but resolute, as he ordered them to leave. His sacrifice weighed heavily on her chest, making every step feel like a betrayal. Yet she knew there was no time to grieve, not if they wanted to survive. The tunnel ahead twisted sharply, leading into a narrow passageway slick with acidic residue. Mara took point, firing blindly at the few remaining drones that lunged at them from the shadows. Their numbers were dwindling. The core's energy must have disrupted the swarm's coordination, but even a single attack could be fatal in their weakened state. We're almost there, Mara said, more to herself than to Voss. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the exhaustion and fear she refused to show outwardly. Finally, they burst into the open air, emerging from the hive's gaping maw just as the entire structure imploded behind them. A deafening boom echoed across the desolate landscape, followed by a blinding flash of light. The ground shook violently, sending both women sprawling onto the ash-covered soil. When they looked back, all that remained of the hive was a smoldering crater, its edges glowing faintly with residual energy. For a moment, silence reigned. Then came the distant hum of dropships descending from orbit. The rest of Eclipse Division had arrived to extract them, guided by Captain Rylan Hayes after losing contact with Kane's team. As the ships touched down, soldiers rushed out to secure the area, helping Voss and Mara aboard. Inside the dropship, Dr. Voss sank into a seat, clutching her head in her hands. Her body trembled, not from physical exertion, but from the emotional toll of what had just transpired. Mara sat beside her, equally drained but forcing herself to stay alert. "He saved us," Voss whispered, her voice breaking. "He gave everything." Mara placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort she could. "He did what he had to do. That's who Kane was, a leader to the end." Back aboard Eclipse Vanguard, the mood was somber. News of Kane's sacrifice spread quickly among the crew, casting a shadow over their hard-fought victory. The swarm's hive mind was gone, for now, but the cost had been immense. Dozens of soldiers lay dead or missing, and the weight of their losses hung heavy in the air. In the medical bay, Dr. Voss worked tirelessly to analyze data collected during the mission. Despite her grief, she couldn't afford to stop. Fragments of the swarm's consciousness lingered in the samples she'd retrieved, hinting at something unsettling. The possibility that the core hadn't completely eradicated the threat. Some parts of the swarm might still exist, scattered across the galaxy like seeds waiting to take root again. As she reviewed the findings, an image appeared on one of her monitors, a faint pulse detected near the edge of the planet's atmosphere. It wasn't strong enough to indicate a full resurgence, but it was there, undeniable and ominous. "Commander," she murmured under her breath, wishing Kane were still here to guide them. Without him, the burden of leadership fell squarely on her shoulders, and she wasn't sure she was ready. Later that night, Mara joined her in the lab, leaning against the doorway with arms crossed. "You should get some rest," she said gently. "Kane wouldn't want you burning yourself out." Voss shook her head. "I can't. Not until I know for sure we stopped it." Mara hesitated before stepping closer. Do you think we really did? Stop it, I mean." Voss stared at the pulsing signal on the screen, her expression grim. "I don't know. But if we didn't, this war isn't over. and Earth might already be in danger. Far above the planet, the fleet prepared to depart, leaving behind the ruins of the Kryn's world and the remnants of the swarm. But as the ships turned toward home, faint whispers echoed through the comms channels once more, reminders that even in victory, the darkness never truly disappeared. And somewhere in the void, the pulse continued to beat, waiting. The ground beneath Eclipse Division's boots crunched with every step as they ventured deeper into the alien ruins. The air was thick and heavy, filled with an eerie silence that made their movements sound unnaturally loud. Towering structures loomed around them, twisted spires of metal and stone, half buried in ash and debris. It was clear this place had once been a thriving city, but now it felt like a tomb. Commander Eric Kane led the team cautiously, his rifle at the ready. Beside him, Lieutenant Marisolis scanned the area with her visor, searching for any signs of movement. Behind them, Dr. Elena Voss followed closely, clutching a handheld scanner that hummed softly as it analyzed the environment. She wasn't trained for combat, but her knowledge might be the key to understanding what had happened here. As they moved further into the ruins, the team noticed something strange. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. They pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. Dr. Voss stopped to examine one of the markings, her brow furrowed in concentration. "These aren't just decorations," she said, running her fingers over the symbol. "This is some kind of language, a warning, maybe." Before anyone could respond, a low growl echoed through the ruins. Everyone froze, weapons raised. From the shadows emerged grotesque creatures, part organic, part machine. Their bodies shimmered with metallic plating, while jagged limbs ended in razor-sharp claws. Glowing red eyes locked onto the intruders, and they lunged without hesitation. "Open fire," Kane shouted, unleashing a barrage of plasma bolts. The rest of the team followed suit, their weapons lighting up the dim surroundings. The creatures screeched as they were hit, retreating back into the darkness. But more kept coming, pouring out from every direction. "We can't hold them off forever," Mara yelled, firing another round. "We need to find cover." Kane spotted a nearby structure, a crumbling building with a reinforced doorway. "Inside." "Move." The team sprinted toward the entrance, fending off attacks as they went. Once inside, they barricaded the door and caught their breath. The creatures clawed at the barrier outside, but it held. For now. "This isn't good," Kane muttered, reloading his weapon. "If there are survivors, we're not going to find them if we're stuck fighting these things." Dr. Voss nodded, still holding her scanner. "There's a strong energy signature coming from below us. Maybe whoever sent the SOS is hiding underground." Kane glanced at her, then at the rest of the team. "All right, let's move down." They found a staircase leading into the depths of the ruins. The descent was tense. Every creak of the steps echoed ominously in the narrow passageway. When they reached the bottom, they entered a vast underground chamber illuminated by pulsating lights. In the center of the room stood a group of figures, alien beings huddled together, their frail forms trembling with fear. One of them stepped forward hesitantly, raising a hand in what appeared to be a gesture of peace. Its skin was pale and translucent, its large, dark eyes filled with desperation. Dr. Voss approached carefully, activating her translation device. Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite her nerves. After a moment of static, the device translated the alien's response. "We are Kryn. We sent the signal. Please, help us." Elena relayed the message to Kane, who lowered his weapon slightly but remained cautious. "What happened here?" he demanded. The Kryn leader hesitated before answering. "The swarm, they came from the void. They consume everything. Energy, life, worlds. We tried to fight, but we failed. Now they hunt us." Dr. Voss listened intently, piecing together fragments of their story. These aliens weren't aggressors. They were victims, Survivors of a catastrophe beyond imagination. But not everyone on the team was convinced. Mara leaned closer to Kane, whispering, "How do we know they're telling the truth? This could all be a setup." Kane didn't answer immediately. He studied the Kryn, weighing their words against the destruction above. For now, they seemed genuine, but trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. "We'll help you," Kane finally said, addressing the Kryn leader. "But you'll have to earn our trust. Tell us everything you know about the swarm." The Kryn nodded eagerly, relief washing over their faces. As they began sharing information, Dr. Voss realized this mission had just become far more complicated and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The fleet of Earth's unified council cut through the cold silence of space, heading toward the mysterious signal from the obsidian expanse. Dozens of ships formed a massive convoy, their sleek hulls glinting faintly under the light of distant stars. At the center of it all was Eclipse Vanguard, the flagship commanded by Commander Eric Kane and his elite unit, Eclipse Division. This wasn't just any mission. It felt like stepping into a nightmare. Dr. Elena Voss had insisted on joining the expedition, arguing that her expertise in alien languages might prove crucial once they reached their destination. Reluctantly, the council agreed, assigning her to work alongside Kane's team. She spent most of her time buried in data, analyzing every fragment of the SOS signal for clues. But as days turned into weeks, strange occurrences began plaguing the fleet. It started small, a flickering console here, an unexplained power surge there. Then came the whispers. Crew members reported hearing faint voices late at night, murmuring words no one could understand. Some claimed they saw shadowy figures moving in empty corridors, only for them to vanish when approached. Tension spread like wildfire, with even seasoned soldiers growing uneasy. Commander Kane tried to keep morale high, but he couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread himself. He called Lieutenant Marisolis into his quarters one evening to discuss the situation privately. "What do you make of it?" Kane asked, leaning against the edge of his desk. Mara crossed her arms, her expression grim. "Could be stress. People get jumpy when they're heading into unknown territory." But she hesitated. "I've been hearing things too, and I don't scare easy." Kane nodded slowly. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just paranoia. Something about this mission felt wrong. As the fleet neared the source of the signal, they encountered their first real obstacle, a vast field of debris orbiting a dying star. The wreckage stretched for miles, littered with twisted metal and shattered hulls. Scans revealed remnants of advanced alien ships, each bearing signs of violent destruction. Burn marks scarred their surfaces, and some were fused together as if melted by unimaginable heat. "This doesn't look like an accident," Dr. Voss said, staring at the holographic display in the observation deck. Her voice trembled slightly. "Whoever did this, they didn't leave survivors." Kane clenched his jaw. The sight of so much devastation made him question whether responding to the SOS had been a mistake. What if whoever, or whatever, had caused this carnage was still out there? Despite the risks, the fleet pressed onward, navigating carefully through the debris field. As they emerged on the other side, the planet emitting the signal finally came into view. It was a desolate world cloaked in perpetual twilight, its surface scarred by craters and jagged mountains. Thick clouds swirled above, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. "This is it," Kane said quietly, addressing his crew over the comms. "Stay sharp. We don't know what we're walking into." Ground teams prepared for deployment while scanners swept the area for signs of life. To everyone's surprise, faint energy readings appeared beneath the planet's surface. Someone, or something, was still alive down there. As the dropships descended, Dr. Voss leaned closer to the viewport, her eyes wide with anticipation. "We're close now," she whispered. "Whatever sent that signal, we're about to find out." But deep inside, a part of her wondered if they were ready for the truth. The planet loomed larger with each passing second, its darkened skies seeming to swallow the light around them. Somewhere below, answers, and perhaps new dangers, waited. The fleet landed cautiously, weapons drawn. The air was thick with tension as Eclipse Division stepped onto alien soil for the first time. They moved cautiously, scanning their surroundings. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of the unknown pressed down on them. And then, in the distance, they saw it, the ruins of a once great civilization, now overrun by strange, biomechanical creatures. Their arrival hadn't gone unnoticed. Whatever awaited them here, it was clear they weren't alone. The strike team moved cautiously through the labyrinthine tunnels of the swarm's hive, their footsteps echoing ominously in the oppressive silence. Commander Eric Kane led the way, his rifle raised and eyes scanning every shadow. Behind him followed Lieutenant Marisolis, Dr. Elena Voss, and a small squad of Eclipse Division's finest soldiers. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very air resisted their intrusion. The hive was unlike anything they'd ever seen, a pulsating, organic structure that seemed alive. Walls oozed with viscous fluid, glowing faintly in shades of green and blue. Strange tendrils writhed overhead, occasionally dripping the acidic liquid onto the floor. The deeper they ventured, the more distorted reality became. Hallways twisted unnaturally, leading them in circles before abruptly opening into vast chambers filled with biomechanical horrors. Dr. Voss clutched the singularity core tightly, her knuckles white. She had insisted on carrying it herself, knowing its activation would require precise timing and trust. But as they pressed onward, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye made her heart race. "This place, it's like it's alive," Mara whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of machinery and distant screeches. "It's watching us." Kane nodded grimly. "Stay sharp. We're not alone." As if on cue, the walls began to shift. Jagged openings appeared, revealing swarms of biomechanical drones pouring into the tunnels. Their glowing red eyes locked onto the intruders, and they charged with terrifying speed. The team opened fire immediately, plasma bolts lighting up the dim passageways. The creatures screeched as they fell, but for every one they killed, 2 more took its place. "We can't keep this up forever," shouted Corporal Jace Torres, firing wildly as a drone lunged at him. He barely dodged its razor-sharp claws, rolling to safety just in time. "Keep moving," Kane barked, blasting a path forward. "We're close." They pushed deeper into the hive, leaving behind trails of destroyed drones and pools of acidic residue. But the cost was mounting. One by one, members of the squad fell, some to injuries, others dragged away screaming by the relentless tide of enemies. By the time they reached the central chamber, only Kane, Mara, and Dr. Voss remained. The core chamber was a nightmare come to life. Towering spires of fused metal and flesh spiraled upward, pulsating with an eerie light. At the center stood a monstrous queen-like entity, the swarm's hive mind incarnate. Its body was a grotesque fusion of organic tissue and mechanical parts, with countless eyes blinking across its surface. Thick cables connected it to the walls, feeding energy into the structure around them. "You've got to be kidding me," Mara muttered, raising her weapon. "How are we supposed to kill that thing?" Before Kane could respond, the entity let out a deafening roar, shaking the entire chamber. Waves of smaller drones surged toward them, forcing the trio to split up. Kane and Mara focused on holding off the attackers while Dr. Voss worked frantically to set up the Singularity core. But as she activated the device, ghostly apparitions began appearing around her. Echoes of civilizations consumed by the swarm. Faces screamed silently, reaching out with pleading hands. Some were alien, others eerily human. It was as if the swarm carried fragments of its victim's consciousness within it, trapped forever in agony. "Elena, focus," Kane shouted, narrowly dodging a drone's attack. "We don't have much time." Tears streamed down Dr. Voss's face as she wrestled with the moral weight of what they were doing. Destroying the hive mind would save countless lives, but it would also erase any chance of freeing those trapped souls. Was this truly justice or vengeance? Her hesitation cost them precious seconds. A massive drone lunged at her, knocking the core from her grasp. Without thinking, Kane dove forward, grabbing the device and slamming it into position. "Do it now," he yelled. With trembling hands, Dr. Voss initiated the countdown. The core began to glow brighter, emitting a low hum that grew louder with each passing second. The swarm reacted violently, its drones converging on their location with renewed ferocity. Kane turned to Voss and Mara. "Get out of here. I'll hold them off." "No," Mara protested, but Kane shoved her toward the exit. "There's no time to argue. Go." As the two women fled, Kane stood his ground, firing until his weapon overheated. The last thing he saw before the world erupted in blinding light was the swarm's queen collapsing inward, consumed by the core's power. The Kryn led Eclipse Division deeper into their underground sanctuary, a labyrinth of dimly lit tunnels and chambers carved from stone. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a faint metallic tang that made Dr. Elena Voss uneasy. Despite their frail appearance, the Kryn moved quickly, their elongated limbs gliding effortlessly through the narrow passages. They seemed desperate to share their story, but also terrified. In a large chamber filled with glowing crystals, the Kryn gathered around a circular table etched with intricate patterns. One of them, taller than the others and adorned with shimmering robes, placed a small device in the center. It hummed softly, projecting holographic images into the air, scenes of war, destruction, and chaos. Dr. Voss leaned closer, her eyes widening as she deciphered fragments of the alien language embedded within the visuals. "This is their history," she whispered to Commander Eric Kane, who stood nearby with his arms crossed. "They're showing us how the swarm began." The holograms depicted the Kryn as a once mighty civilization, masters of advanced technology and bioengineering. Centuries ago, they had created the swarm, not as a natural entity, but as a weapon. At first it was meant to be controlled, a tool for conquering rival species and expanding their empire. But something went horribly wrong. The swarm evolved beyond their understanding, gaining sentience and an insatiable hunger for energy. It turned on its creators, devouring entire planets before spreading across the galaxy. Lieutenant Mara Solis frowned, gripping her rifle tightly. "So they unleashed this thing themselves. And now they expect us to clean up their mess." Kane shot her a warning glance but didn't disagree. His jaw tightened as he processed the implications. If the Kryn were responsible for the swarm, could they really be trusted? Or was this some elaborate ploy to save themselves at humanity's expense? Dr. Voss, however, saw things differently. She stepped forward, addressing the Kryn leader directly. "Why didn't you tell us this sooner?" Her voice was calm but firm. The Kryn hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. Finally, their leader spoke, his words translated haltingly by Voss's device. "We feared your judgment. Our people. We are ashamed. But we have no choice. If the swarm is not stopped, it will consume your world next." Before anyone could respond, one of the younger Kryn suddenly collapsed, clutching his chest. A faint glow emanated from beneath his skin, pulsating erratically. The others rushed to his side, murmuring urgently in their native tongue. Moments later, the young Kryn let out a blood-curdling scream, and then went still. "What just happened?" Kane demanded, raising his weapon instinctively. Dr. Voss knelt beside the lifeless body, examining it closely. "It's residue from the swarm," she said grimly. "Their bodies are breaking down because they've been exposed to its energy for too long. They don't have much time left." The revelation hit the team like a punch to the gut. These aliens weren't just victims. They were dying, slowly being consumed by the very force they created. For all their mistakes, they were paying a heavy price. Commander Kane wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he wanted to walk away, leaving the Kryn to face the consequences of their actions. On the other, he couldn't ignore the fact that Earth might be next on the swarm's list. He turned to Dr. Voss. "Can we use any of their tech to fight back?" She nodded hesitantly. "Some of it might help, but it's risky. Their systems are unstable, and replicating their designs could take weeks or months." As tensions mounted, the Kryn leader stepped forward again. With a deep breath, he activated another hologram, a map of the planet's surface overlaid with red markers. "This is where the swarm gathers," he explained. "Its hive mind controls everything. Destroy it, and you may weaken the swarm enough to stop it." But there was a catch. The hive was heavily guarded, and reaching it would require navigating through swarms of biomechanical creatures far deadlier than the ones they'd already faced. Worse still, the Kryn admitted they didn't know if destroying the hive would truly end the threat, or merely delay it. Mara shook her head in frustration. "This feels like suicide." Kane remained silent, weighing their options. Then, without warning, the Kryn leader reached for a control panel on the wall and pressed a button. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a sleek metallic sphere covered in glowing runes. He handed it to Dr. Voss. "This is our singularity core," he said solemnly. "If activated near the hive, it will collapse the swarm's network. But it must be done manually. Someone will have to stay behind to ensure it works." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Sacrifice. That was the cost of stopping the swarm. Weeks passed since the fleets returned to Earth, but peace remained elusive. The Unified Council worked tirelessly to fortify planetary defenses, deploying orbital satellites armed with plasma cannons and retrofitting military bases with Kryn-inspired technology. Eclipse Division trained harder than ever, preparing for a potential resurgence of the swarm. Yet, despite these efforts, an unsettling tension lingered in the air, a feeling that something was still wrong. Dr. Elena Voss couldn't shake the sense of unease. She spent long hours in her lab, analyzing data from the mission and running simulations on the swarm's behavior. Her findings painted a troubling picture. While the Singularity Core had destroyed the hive mind, fragments of the swarm's consciousness appeared to have survived. These remnants were scattered across space, like embers waiting for fuel to reignite into flames. One evening, as she reviewed sensor logs from the fleet's journey home, she noticed anomalies, faint energy spikes detected near several ships during transit. At first, she dismissed them as residual effects of the core's detonation. But upon closer inspection, the patterns matched those associated with the swarm. It wasn't just random interference. It was deliberate, almost predatory. Voss immediately reported her discovery to Lieutenant Mara Solis, who now led Eclipse Division. Together, they convened an emergency meeting with Captain Rylan Hayes and key members of the Unified Council. Holographic projections displayed the energy signatures alongside reconstructed images of the swarm's biomechanical drones. "This isn't over," Voss said, her voice steady but urgent. "The swarm is adapting. It's finding ways to survive without its hive mind." Council members exchanged worried glances. One asked, "Are you saying it could reassemble itself?" "Not entirely," Voss replied. "But it doesn't need to. Even small clusters of the swarm pose a significant threat if they reach Earth." She didn't finish the sentence. Everyone understood the stakes. Meanwhile, strange incidents continued aboard the fleet. Soldiers reported hearing whispers late at night, voices speaking in languages no one recognized. Equipment malfunctions became more frequent, often accompanied by eerie flickering lights. Some claimed to see shadowy figures moving through corridors, vanishing when approached. Medical staff noted a spike in psychological distress among crew members, with many experiencing vivid nightmares about glowing red eyes and endless voids. Mara took it upon herself to investigate. Late one night, she patrolled the lower decks of Eclipse Vanguard, where most of the reports originated. As she walked, the ship seemed unnaturally quiet, save for the hum of machinery. Then she heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. It called her name. "Mara." She froze, her hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm. The corridor ahead was empty, yet the voice persisted, growing louder. Her heart raced as she advanced cautiously, scanning every shadow. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. Not human, but not quite alien either. Its form shifted and shimmered, resembling a distorted amalgamation of metal and flesh. Before she could react, the creature lunged at her. Mara fired, her plasma bolts striking true. But instead of collapsing, the entity dissolved into wisps of smoke, leaving behind only a faint residue on the floor. Back in the command center, Mara recounted the encounter to Hayes and Voss. Both listened intently, their expressions grim. "It's here," Hayes muttered. "On our ships. In our systems." Voss nodded, her face pale. "The swarm isn't just physical. It's digital, too. It's infiltrating our networks, spreading like a virus." Hayes issued immediate orders to quarantine affected vessels and scrub all onboard systems. Technicians worked around the clock, isolating infected nodes and attempting to purge the swarm's influence. But progress was slow, and the entity proved resilient, adapting faster than they could counteract. As days turned into weeks, the situation worsened. More sightings were reported, not just on ships, but also on Earth itself. Surveillance cameras captured fleeting glimpses of biomechanical creatures lurking in abandoned facilities and remote wilderness areas. Governments scrambled to contain panic, but rumors spread quickly, igniting fear among the population. In private, Mara confided in Voss. "We stopped the hive mind, but we underestimated the swarm. It's smarter than we thought, and far more dangerous." Voss stared out at Earth's night sky, her expression heavy with dread. "If we don't find a way to neutralize it completely, this planet won't stand a chance."